Tatiana Kukhareva, thank you so much for joining us from Moscow. Just to get a sense of what the situation is now after President Putin's national address that he gave on Tuesday. Now, if you look at the figures, they seem to have increased from when we were looking at it last, from India at least. Almost 100,000 infected, over 800 deaths. It's about 700 plus in India as well. From what President Putin's message was to the Russian people, what do you really take out? Because when you look at the numbers, what's happened is now you're 8th on the list of most infected. You're above China and Iran in the last week.
Well, yes, thank you very much. And it's very nice. I'm very grateful to be here. Technically, yes, obviously the numbers are still growing. We're not at peak yet, according to everything that we've heard from the doctors. We're not even, well, we're nearing the peak we're supposed to be, but thankfully we've managed to slow down the spread of the virus significantly. So the medics are actually coping quite well. And, the mood overall, I can't speak for Moscow generally because, I'm a Moscovite and I live here. I've lived here almost all my life. I don't believe that a lot has changed. I think that the majority of people were not expecting to be out come, the beginning of May. Also, the beginning of May are the traditional long holidays for Russians. So we have generally the majority of people takes that time off. And we have about a week off combined before the first, in between the 1st and the 2nd May holidays. So there are 2 long weekends and 3 to 4, depending on the year, days in between. So that time that ended up being off kind of work, that's very
already factored in. It was already expected.
Yeah. Sorry?
So it was already expected. You're saying it was factored in. Now, the May 12th extension that has been given, again, there is already a plan, or they would be working on a plan in terms of when that lockdown is lifted, of how you come out of it, an exit plan of sorts, whether it's graded, whether it's regional, whether it's dependent on the local situation.
As you know, that the president has given the regions a significant amount of power in terms of handling the lockdown to begin with, so they decide themselves when and how they impose the measures, the stricter measures, the less strict measures. So I do believe that for the majority of the regions is going to be the same when it comes to the exit strategy as well. We have the biggest clusters of the contagion so far, and obviously the number one is Moscow. So, it's a very different situation in Moscow and, say, somewhere in Siberia, where they have the numbers are still within 100 of people infected per city. And I do believe, yes, well, again, I'm a journalist like you, so it would be very unwise for me to believe that we would just suddenly start walking when everybody knows that we're not at peak yet. And I do believe that there's going to be another extension following this one. But, we will have to wait and see. We have still 2 weeks ahead of us.
You're talking about Moscow, then there's Moskovskaya Rayona, there is St. Petersburg, then there is Nizhny Novgorod, which is seen as those hotspots that you were talking about. In terms of Moscow itself, which would probably have the best health infrastructure, what stage are authorities saying they are at? Because if I see some of the statements that have come out, whether it's from the mayor Sobyanin or the deputy mayor, they're already saying that possibly they've reached 40% of the number of beds that they have in Moscow. Is that a correct figure?
We have heard on a number of times that that the medics in Moscow and that capacities are kind of nearing the limits. But there's also, you have to understand that in Moscow they've built a whole new hospital in the time that we've been in this situation. So the preparation and the Moscow authorities are doing an incredible amount of work to ensure that we have more beds, that we have. I personally have a couple of friends who are doctors, but they have nothing to do with respiratory system, and they've all had basic training. They've been retrained in order to be able to intubate patients. They've even had this. We've even had that meme going around the internet, the Russian internet, saying, stay at home unless you want to be intubated by, I do believe it was a dermatologist. But yeah, that's the general idea. So they've done an incredible amount of work ensuring that all of the doctors who can be mobilized, they are ready to take up pick up where we might have problems. And they are building beds, building hospitals, configuring hospitals. There are entire hospitals that are, being kind of reformatted and given specifically to treating the COVID patients, all of it. So there's a lot going on.
We've seen across the world itself that it's possibly the big companies or the government-owned companies that have the necessary wherewithal, financial, to see through this lockdown period when essentially people are not working, incomes are not coming in, revenues not coming in. It would be similar for small businesses, despite what the government is doing, whether it's giving out cash, you have tax reforms, you have various other measures that the government has announced.
So far, unfortunately, it will be the same because, the key thing and the only thing that we know so far as there's no vaccine, is that the people need to stay inside. However, I must say that a lot of businesses in Russia, in Moscow, have kind of found their way to adapt, and they've gone online. Everybody who can go online, they have gone online. So I believe that we might be looking at a very different reality on the other side of this crisis and the situation, that even in Europe, where the internet is worse generally than in Russia, they are going online, and obviously we have before them.
And there are measures that have been taken in terms of direct cash to, say, those who are unemployed, those who have children.
Yes, they have established specific sums of money that will be given to people who are unemployed, but also you can't quite fire anybody during this period. So they've ensured the fact that the people have their jobs insured until the end of this the crisis. So that people get paid and do not lose jobs. So there's a set of measures.
When you were earlier referring to the fact that President Putin had given the regional authorities, the governors, the provinces, the authority to deal with the situation as they saw locally they needed to. There is a view that is put forward also, whether it's from outside Russia, that President Putin, who is normally seen as, very macho, and you see him bare-bodied in the snow, is giving, taking the credit whenever he can, but if there are any faults, he will let the local authorities deal with any kind of public anger, so as to speak.
Well, that's quite a view of our president, to think that he takes credit whenever he can. That's that's very interesting. I do wonder where that comes from. Which part of the world that perception would come from. It's very interesting.
Fair enough. Fair enough. What about the measures? Like, I mean, for you yourself, when you go out, is there a restriction of? You're saying everything is online, but
So I
if you
don't
need
go
to,
out. That's
oh,
the
you don't
thing.
go out.
No. Well, see, the thing about giving governors right and the power to decide, uh, it's a very wise thing. For one, because you have Moscow, where you have tens of thousands of infected, and then you have, say, I don't know, Kaluga, where
Mhm.
you don't quite have that many people infected. So if you impose the same measures in both cities, then by the time, and don't get me wrong, the virus is still spreading. We're not saying
Sure.
that we've battled it or that we've stopped the spread. The measures are there in a bid to ensure that the medical capabilities are up to speed with what we need. So by the time that Kaluga, a smaller town outside of Moscow, reaches that peak, the people are going to be exhausted.
Mhm.
It
Sure.
all started with Moscow. It was very well. It was quite fast in the beginning. Not as fast as anywhere else, obviously, because even then our authorities took it very seriously. They were observing China. They were observing what was happening in, say, Italy, where it was a disaster. And then we had crazy reports from there, and the pictures were very frightening. So they did put everybody who was coming out from Europe on quarantine, mandatory, and they did everything to ensure that even in Moscow the spread was limited and the spread was slowed down. But to put a city, a huge city like Moscow, on lockdown amid tens of thousands of people infected, even that is a very strict measure. We
Sure.
can't. And you say when you go out, I'm not allowed to go out. I do have a work pass, as do all of the journalists who are working, but I work online, so I don't need to go out. And technically, I can go out. I'm allowed to go out to walk my dog,
Mhm.
to go,
To the
you know,
apteka, maybe.
garbage, yes, and to the closest pharmacy and the closest food shop around me in my block. That's it. The rest of us, and everybody in Moscow is in the same situation. We're not allowed to. But if there is a city where relatively and even in absolute numbers there are scores less people
Mhm.
infected, then of course they can walk, they can run still, they can do sports. Thing that I miss personally the most, being able to go for a run.
Mhm. When you're talking about how strict, say, it is in Russia, are there any concerns? Because we do know that there's a lot of surveillance, whether it's cameras online, tracking online. Are there any worries that post the lockdown, this kind of information about people will not be regulated?
Well, you know again, everybody who has this,
Yeah, sure.
by definition, should understand that, of course, there are services in place, and they always have been. How else do we cope with the threat of global terrorism and local terrorism as well? Um, has that been filtering through in the media? Yes, it has. Obviously, there are always some activists, some people who are
Yeah.
saying that, oh my God, we're all the big brother's watching us. We're all going to be surveilled. But we have been surveilled. The surveillance is, look at the movies, how many movies there are about, spy movies and etc. It's just that the surveillance and everything else is moving along with the times. So technically, it's just evolving. But we can't say that, there is surveillance, there's going to be surveillance. There always has been. That's
Yeah.
the means to keep us safe.
When you look again, statements that have come out from the Kremlin, from Dmitry Peskov, when he praised, say, India, because you have a lot of Russian nationals here, and I think
Yes.
over 2,000 have been able to go back. Maybe another 4,000 still. India's also sent some hydrochlorine tablets or paracetamol tablets, medicines that have been sent there. Sergei Lavrov has also praised it. Maria Zakharova has also talked about that. So, in a sense, the India-Russia ties, even in this time of real crisis, are really looking up.
Obviously, and I think that, it's the times of global crises when we find out who our real partners are. I can't speak for the for the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs. Obviously, it's up to them, and not for the state either. But I do believe, as a journalist, I believe that we've seen partnerships grow. We've seen partnerships fail during times of crises. It's the time to understand who your real partners are, and yes, the Russian authorities have thanked India a couple of times now for its help.
And how do the normal people really look at China now, in the sense of if there have been a lot of reports from across the world about, say, racist attacks or against Chinese because of the virus, and has that changed in any manner? What is the mood on the street like vis-a-vis China?
Well, again, we need to understand that Russia is a huge country that
Yeah, of
also
course.
has quite a large border with China. So, and also it's not, we're not the United States of America. We don't blame others for our failures in terms of response to the crisis. I haven't heard anything of the sorts, and I don't expect to hear anything of the sorts from our government. We have a crisis at hand. We can't blame China for the fact that the outbreak happened there. They actually curbed the spread. They warned everybody. So, I do believe that people who read and people who think, they will not. They can't blame an entire state for something that happened in one city. Well, we now know that we should probably stay off some exotic food choices,
Yeah.
but might have been, it could have been a tourist. That's what I'm saying. The patient zero could have been a tourist, technically. You never know.
Domestically, of course, the constitutional referendum has been put off. Now, is that completely on the back burner because of the situation in terms of domestic?
Of course not. Of course not. But that's going to happen when it's going to happen. They're gonna say when exactly. But obviously, a time of lockdown and when people are already stressed because staying inside is quite stressful. It's not about. It's just about the limitations, the fact that we're not used to staying in and to having this many restrictions thrust upon us. People obviously are feeling the pressure, and there's also the fear of actually contracting the virus. So it's just not the time, I think. But again, that's up to the Kremlin to decide. Not, I mean.
Again, it's not the time. You were talking about May and how people usually, in normal circumstances, would probably take the whole week off because of various holidays, and culminating in May 9th, Victory Day for Bear Din. That has also been postponed, and that is one of the biggest days in across Russia. It would have been celebrated. Is it all moving online? Even the parade of the Immortal Regiment, is that all moving online so as to not miss out on the tradition?
I do believe that since they've moved the celebrations so far, they've moved into September, but they will have we will have an air parade.
Yeah.
It's still happening. The tradition, but it's my personal opinion as a citizen, as a person. Sadly, my grandparents are already dead, and I can't quite congratulate them. But if I could, for me, it would be about family, about honoring my elders who went through the war, who fought in the war. And I do believe that these restrictions, this lockdown, has actually shown us what is important, and that's the people closest to you. And I think that the majority of people are going to still celebrate. They're just going to celebrate within the family, and honor those who they still can, if they still have them, around. It's about showing respect to the people who sacrificed in the Great War.
Tatiana Kukhareva, спасибо большое. Очень приятно было с вами говорить. Thank you so much, and do stay safe.
Thank you so much, and vice versa. Stay safe, please. Thank you.